Hello, it's Linnell Glisson, Executive Director of Community Services, going over our reserve study. In 2024, we had an on-site reserve study, which means a reserve study specialist came on site, met with department heads, took pictures and cataloged all our reserve assets. Reserve assets are things like our vehicles, our pools, golf course equipment, things of that nature. Why do we do a reserve study? Well, we do a reserve study for financial planning, so we know when we will need to replace a component and how much it will cost, and that helps us plan for the future. When you make your reserve contribution through your assessments, you're paying for today's use. So you're paying for the wear and tear that happens on the components of today, so that when it needs to be replaced, the money's there for replacement. It also maintains values. Having a reserve study done and following the plan outlined in the study helps preserve the value of the association property as well as homeowners' properties. It also reduces the need for special assessments. If you plan for your spending and replacing your components, there's no surprises, so we won't need to utilize special assessments to pay for something that's failed. The money's already there. The foundations of the reserve study is they need to be accurate, objective, that's why we have a third party perform the reserve study, and they need to be complete. It needs to include everything that fits the criteria. It has a useful life of 30 years or less, and a replacement cost of $5,000 or more. There's various funding types. There's baseline. Baselines, you just have just enough to replace the things that are scheduled in your current year. Threshold, it's like an agreed upon percent, like we will fund a certain percent of our reserves. Fully funded is 100% funded, and statutory, what is required by law. In Arizona, we do not have any statutory reserve requirements. So I wanted to kind of explain the difference between threshold and percent funded. Iron Oaks is per the policy document, the Iron Oaks funding plan, objective should be between 2.5 and 3.5 years of reserve funds. So I use these glasses up here as an example. So we want to have enough money reserved so that we could cover this year's, next year's, and half of the following year's reserve component replacements, up to 3 years and a half of reserve component replacements. So what that means is, if whatever we have in reserves for 2026, 2027, and half of 2028, we want to have that money in the bank. Up to, if we're talking about this year, 2026, 2027, 2028, and half of 2029. So that if everything broke all at once, we would be able to cover these 3 years and a half of replacing those things. Percent funded is a ratio of the reserve fund balance at a point in time compared to fully funded. This picture right here is actually, of these glasses, is actually more representative of 100% funded. So in the year that we are at, 2026, we can replace everything. Next year, we have just a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. But by the time we hit 2027, this glass will be full. By the time we hit this glass in 2028, this glass will be full, so on and so forth. So you're putting away money just enough so that when the year comes around, you can replace everything in that with the components that are scheduled to be replaced within that year. And that means actually fully funded. So I know there's some conversations about which is a better method, percent fund versus our modified threshold. I think this works really well for Iron Oaks because if you were fully funded, I think it would be like, it's probably a larger number now, you'd have $30 million in the bank, which is not necessarily a good use of association's funds. And that had to be taught to me too, because I was in the mindset of, why wouldn't you be fully funded? But it makes more sense to me now. It's not an exact science. Every association has to do what they feel is best for them. And I think Iron Oaks is pretty well set up. It's very closely watched, adjusted as needed, and I think we're in a good place. Common mistakes are underfunding, not replacing the components, and irregular maintenance between replacement. And that's something that associations need to stay on top of and can get away from them. But I think here at Iron Oaks, again, we're doing a good job of those three things. Every year is an opportunity to correct. I'm sure you've heard the 1 in 60 rule. If a ship is off course by 1 degree in 60 miles, it will be a mile off course. And that's why the reserves are closely watched, because we want to make constant corrections and adjustments to make sure that we're in a good financial standing. An on-site study has a third-party reserve specialist that comes on site and inspects each component. They also meet with department heads who oversee the components within their departments, look at contracts, determine cost. The third party determines useful life based on reserve study standards and the environment that the component is in. Here in Arizona, the heat, the sun, sometimes the useful life is less than in other locations. It accounts for inflation of replacement costs, 3% annually, and it accounts for interest in the reserve fund investments. So in the last, since 2022, the association contributed to, in 2022, 2.6 million, same in 2023. In 2024, they increased that to 3 million. In 2025, it was increased to 3.8. That had a lot to do with our roads that we are annually either replacing or maintaining. And then in 2026, the reserve contribution was 4.4. The board has adopted a laddering investment method so that your money is making interest while in the bank, but it's available when needed, when reserve components need to be replaced. The money is available and not tied up in an investment. The reserves versus capital improvement. That's always a question. Why is it a reserve? Can we use reserve funds on capital improvement? Reserve components are existing components. Capital improvements are new components. Improving an existing component does not make it a capital improvement necessarily. So, for example, um, we're replacing um, a pump station, let's say. Well, the model and make of that pump station is no longer available. They don't make them anymore. And so because it's a different thing, doesn't change, we're not changing it like for like. It's a different thing altogether doing the same function. So that it's still a reserve component. And if we decide, if the community decides in replacing pool furniture that they want to add umbrellas or tables, and there wasn't umbrellas and tables there at that location before, it's still a reserve. It's not exactly like for like. If you have pool furniture up in reserves and you want to replace it with something that's not exactly the same, that's okay. That's a part of reserves. It's a component replaced is not required to be with a similar component. Logical upgrades to an existing asset or system that is obsolete, ineffective, or no longer effective serves the needs of the association can be accomplished as a reserve project. The board's responsibilities. The board's responsibilities is to follow the policies within the IOPM. Their responsibility is to serve the association and not have pet projects or, advocate for certain things that don't benefit the entire association. And they are to have, their responsibility is a business judgment rule. Business judgment rule is performed in their duties in good faith, with the care that an ordinary prudent person in a like position would exercise under similar circumstances, and in a manner the directors reasonably believe to be in the best interest of the corporation. So, and I know that our boards have been really good about that. I wanted to share an example of a current reserve component that will be replaced. The monument signs. These monument signs are original and they've been updated here and there, but the community really wanted to upgrade them. They're in the reserves. Money has been put aside specifically to replace the monument signs. So it's not, going back to, there's no special assessment, there's nothing additional funds that the members need to come up with. The money's there. You guys have put away money annually for the replacement of the reserve components. Buildings and Grounds Committee is overseeing this project. Because it's in the reserves, it is a Buildings and Grounds Committee kind of task to monitor the reserves and review reserve components and replacements. There was some community input as it pertained to logos and designs. Board had input. It went through the bidding process. And here we are with the final RBA before the board to approve this project. It's something that's absolutely necessary to do to maintain the aesthetics of the community, keep it attractive to the wider community, and maintain property values. So thank you so much for listening to me talk about reserve studies. This is something that I am passionate about and I work on nearly daily. The reserves are a very important part of maintaining this community in top-notch condition. Thank you so much.